12, Paul brings us to the understanding that though we live in the flesh, we have contentions with principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, and spiritual wickedness in the heavenly. These are the spirits controlling this world. There are many battles going on in the second heaven, which we cannot see. Whatever happens there directly affects the earthly realm. There are 3 heavens as revealed to Apostle Paul, 2 Corinthians 12, verse 2. The first heaven is the firmament above us. The second heaven is the vast space that lies above the skies, while the third heaven is the heaven of heavens, where God dwells. Therefore, the second heaven divides the first heaven from the third heaven, which is the headquarters of demonic activities. This second heaven accommodates Satan and his fallen angels. Hence, the kingdom of darkness is established here. I believe this understanding will help us in several ways. Due to the spiritual world's reality, there is a lot more going on around you than you can see. An example is found in 2 Kings 6 verse 17. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And, behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. The king of Syria had sent a host to lie in wait for prophet Elisha. When Gehazi, Elisha's servant, saw the host of chariots, he was terrified. But Elisha had a great understanding of the spiritual world and the host of hosts working for his defense. Then he prayed that the eyes of his servant be opened. Listen to me, child of God. You are never alone. You need to come to the level of understanding that the windows of heaven are open, and the army of heaven is there for you regardless of what situation you may face. You may feel like you are going through life alone or that you are going through a situation alone, but believe the Bible. A child of God is never alone. You see, spirits influence everything that happens in the earthly realm. Everyone is filled by a spirit. It is either you are controlled by the Holy Spirit or you have another spirit controlling you. In 1 Kings 22, the Bible recorded how that a lying spirit from the heavenly volunteered to deceive King Ahab to go to a battle that the Lord was to go with him. The lying spirit entered into 400 prophets, and they prophesied falsely. This was the conversation between the Lord and the lying spirit. And the Lord said unto him, Wherewith? And he said, I will go forth, and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he said, Thou shalt persuade him, and prevail also. Go forth, and do so. Verse 22. Having understood the reality of the spiritual world, as believers we need to know that we can influence it through fasting and prayer. You have the power to influence the spiritual world through prayer. Do you understand the power you have? but yet we neglect prayer. When you pray, you may not always be aware of what is happening, but be encouraged by the Bible that your prayers are affecting things in the unseen world. A battle is raging, and our prayers are shifting things in the heavenlies. We must persevere in seeking God. We must persevere in prayer and interceding for His kingdom to come and will to be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Whether we realize it or not, our prayers are changing things in the spiritual world. And one of the keys for prevailing prayer is steadfast perseverance. Like Daniel, we must set our hearts toward the Lord and press through until the answer comes. Now I am asking you, why don't you take your prayer life more seriously? Whether we realize it or not, our prayers are changing things in the spiritual world. We need to know that we can influence it through fasting and prayer. However, we would appreciate our ability to control the spirit's realm better when we discover who we are in Christ. Ephesians 1 verse 19 to 23 establishes that Christ has been glorified and is now sitting at the right-hand side of God in the heavenly places, the third heaven, far above principalities and powers. Now, in Colossians 2, verse 10, the Bible says, "And ye are complete in Him, which is the head of all principality and power." This means that believers' positions in the heavenly places is exactly where Jesus is. We have a higher position in the spirit realm as believers than demon spirits. Our authority as believers can be fully exercised when we engage in fasting and prayer. Begin to use your authority. Stop allowing the devil to push you around. Stop allowing the devil and his army to destroy your marriage. Stop allowing the devil to dictate your life. Stop allowing the devil to call the shots in your life. Jesus gave us this authority in Matthew 18, verse 18, when He said, "Verily I say unto you, whatsoever ye shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." How does a believer bind or loose? A believer binds and looses when he or she engages in fasting and prayer. So, for believers who realize their spiritual position, they can dictate what happens in their own spiritual atmospheres. So I encourage you to begin to dictate what happens in your spiritual atmosphere. Don't be a pushover. Stand your ground and protect yourself and your family. When believers refuse to bind, things remain loose. And when believers refuse to loose, things remain bound. In Acts chapter 2, the devil stirred up King Herod against the believers in the early church, and he slew James with the sword. Next, Herod got hold of Peter and imprisoned him. He was looking for an opportunity to kill him when the church arose to responsibility. As the church prayed, heaven responded by sending an angel to set Peter free. Verse 7. You see, the devil will keep afflicting your family until you take responsibility. Believers must not take fasting and prayer for granted. That is our weapon against the spiritual powers controlling this world. Prayer is the medium by which believers are permitted to exercise authority over the earth realm. However, our battles are not physical, but spiritually inclined.
Luke 11:9. And so I tell you, keep on asking, and you will receive what you ask for. Keep on seeking, and you will find. Keep on knocking, and the door will be opened to you. Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. Luke 18:1. In the parable of the persistent widow, Jesus teaches us that prayer is not just a one-off ticking a box matter. Although he encourages us that our Heavenly Father will hear our prayer, he also leaves no doubt that we may need to pray repeatedly and persistently until we receive our answer. If you have been praying for something and are still waiting for God to answer, this is for you. Do not lose heart. Do not be discouraged. Persist, just as the widow persisted. Persistent prayer is perhaps the weapon our enemy Satan fears the most. This is why he will try and discourage us to not keep praying.
Seven experience where we talk about six packs, six figures, and Sabbath. In other words, health, wealth, and spirituality. And we like to get into it. My name is Shane Carling, and I'm here with my co-host, Jordan Rouse. And today we're going to be talking about a really powerful subject. We're going to be talking about grace versus forgiveness. So I think today's conversation is definitely going to be mostly I guess centered in spirituality, but we're going to throw some world point of views in here as well, and I think this is really a conversation of matters of the heart. So yeah, Jordan, why don't you kick this off and let's get it rolling.
Yeah. All right, guys. I just want to let you know the whole time we were talking about grace versus forgiveness is going to be fun. We're live on YouTube too. I can see the chat right here. So if you see me looking over, it's just a look for your chat as we go through this, and I'll be monitoring it and you can be part of the conversation. So we're trying to make this a little bit of a fun, interactive experience because we have like 1,000 people watching this, but they tune in all parts of the week. So, you know, if you tune in the Monday night at 9 p.m., this is where we're going to be. So guys, it's awesome to have you. Grace versus forgiveness. Now, this was kind of put on my heart a while ago because I started to understand the difference. And, you know, it was just sitting there in my mind, like going through stories of my life. And you went through an extreme pain or when you've wronged somebody, and that always sits on your heart until you go kind of rectify it or seek what I call forgiveness. You actually apologize for it, make it right, whatever you want to call that. Shane, you know what I'm talking about?
So yeah, absolutely. It's like this feeling that irks you, I think at the end of the day, we all have a conscience. Well, actually, I don't think we do. I know we don't. Every single human being is born with a conscience. Whether they listen to the conscience or not is another story. But we have a conscience. We know what's right and wrong. We know when our pride and our ego generally get the best of us. Like for me, especially I guess in text messages, like there's been times I'm guilty of firing those missiles when you shouldn't have, like I'm like, oh, I'm going to say this. And I'm thinking, don't say it. Don't say that. Do not, Shane. But I'm freaking, next thing I know, a whole lot of hell breaks loose. And I caused that. But yeah, I definitely knew. I felt the buzzer. I felt the warning signs. I felt the adrenaline, you know what I mean? The ego drive saying, you're going to let them say what to you? You better say something back. And then, you go like one extra. But anyways, yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff happens for sure. Definitely have felt the being in the wrong.
So anyways, that call, Shane, is like put on the shoulders. And the reason I was thinking about this is because a lot of us say, oh, I've forgiven that person. Okay. And I want to put it out there that you can't forgive people unless they ask for forgiveness. They have to seek forgiveness. That is an act of kindness. So what you're doing when you're saying you're kind of releasing that off your own shoulders is you're giving what I think in my mind is called grace. You're giving them a form of grace. You're saying, there might've been this bad act, something went on, this occurred, but I'm going to let that slide and I'm going to give you grace on that piece. Right. So grace is like unsought sort of forgiveness. I believe that forgiveness is an intentional thing that the person who did the wrongful act needs to seek. Otherwise, it's just a graceful action. If you say, oh, I've forgiven that. Well, actually, you've put that under grace. I have grace for that and I've handled that, but forgiving it is this action where I think someone actually has to seek it. Right. So it's for their own action. That's my thesis on this.
Okay. I hear you on that, but my belief on grace is the idea behind grace is to give someone something good, even though they deserve punish, even though they deserve bad. You know what I mean? Like they've done wrong. They have violated something they've done. They've committed something atrocious, or they have committed an offense. Okay. They have sinned. You know what I mean? Either against themselves or another. And instead of walking in judgment and creating separation or being in contention, grace is just like, yeah, no big deal. It's all good. You don't like, grace is not asking the person to ask for forgiveness. Grace is, because then it's not grace.
No, it's forgiveness.
That's forgiveness. The difference is grace. You don't need for example, like Jesus dies on a cross, right? Take all of our sins. Now that's grace for us, right? It's grace for us. But every time you do something wrong, let's say you've accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you do something wrong. You're not like sitting there every single time, geez, forgive me, I'm so sorry. Like you've already been forgiven. It's all under grace. Forgiveness is more just self-recognition and realization that maybe an action was wrong. And you feel guilty so much that you actually are brought to the higher level of wisdom, which is asking for forgiveness, which shows a course correction or an adjustment of your trajectory, right?
So that was I think we actually agree on that, Shane, based off what you said, because grace is like, and people will bring up this, like Jesus is praying on our behalf. He's saying, forgive us, for they know not what they do. Right. So he was seeking forgiveness for us. And the way we're forgiven is through him. That's why we live under grace, which is like this forgiveness that we haven't sought, And it's interesting. So by professing, we actually seek the grace and we ask for the forgiveness from God. And that's why in the prayers, like, forgive us our trespasses and those who trespass against us, right? So it's an interesting idea. And a lot of people, like, this is a kind of contentious topic because, you know, giving people grace kind of puts you in a higher standing. You're in a statement of judgment because you're saying that this person did do something wrong. But I think that our discernment allows us to say if something is right or something is wrong. You know, I think that that's a legitimate thing. I don't know about you, but that's kind of my understanding of it. So to actually have forgiveness in life is something you have to go seek. And I think a lot of people let time bury their sins instead of actually going to, like, work it out. And I think that kind of, from my experience though, like, when I don't go make something right, okay, when I don't go fix it, I always have more weight on my shoulders. And I don't know about you, but it's just things like, we went to some deep topics like spiritual warfare and everything like that. But I believe that the greatest thing that can hang on our shoulders is knowing we've done something wrong to other people and not seeking to rectify it. It's like this permanent weight that can weigh on you, right? And so I think you actually have to go, it says from what we read, right? From what I understand, you actually have to go seek the forgiveness of the person that you wronged.
Well, I think, and I'd like to see you point to the scriptures that say that, but it's a good idea, but it's not mandatory. You know what I mean? It's not mandatory because, you know, imagine how ridiculous you'd be if you went around trying to, like, first of all, remember everyone you've ever offended. Where do you draw the line? You know, like on what degree of offense, like how do we calculate the
talking about
the
big things that weigh on your heart? Not like, hey, I didn't buy that guy a cup of coffee.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm talking like, hey, I stole that guy's stuff, or hey, I lied to that dude, or hey, I did something offensive against my family.
Yeah.
You know, like serious things that you don't forget. Like, things don't stay on your heart. Like, hey, I forgot to give that guy a quarter. Like, doesn't stay on your heart. You know, but I'm talking about weighty stuff here. Like, I'm sure there's things that you still have on your shoulders that you haven't actually actively sought forgiveness.
Yeah, I've done it, most of it. Yeah, I don't have anything on my shoulders anymore. I mean, I've already done all that stuff. But, you know, like, usually the thing is I'm pretty quick to apologize, you know? Like, if I say something dumb or if I do something that's ignorant, usually within a day or so, I would dawn, like, at the latest, you know, I would have dawned on me, and I'm pretty quick to call someone up and say, hey, I came across like a total jerk and really apologize, especially because I'm in marketing. You know, sometimes people will pitch me on freaking their businesses, and sometimes I'm a bit of a bulldog. I'm just like, you know, instead of like, oh yeah, thanks for sending me a link and spamming me, I'm just like, man, this is the worst kind of marketing. You expecting to get like no results, you know, like, yeah, I've only generated like hundreds of thousands and helped people become millionaires, but yeah, you shouldn't take any of my advice, you know, like, I probably just I only know exactly what I'm talking about. And so, like, sometimes I'm jerky. I'm a bit of a jerk to people who spam market me, but I do it out of love. I really do. It's a loving thing to help them not suck at marketing. And it's great advice for free. It's very straight, direct advice, but not super nice. And but I've done that, and then I've reached back out to people and being like, hey, you know, I was kind of rude to you yesterday. How you doing with your stuff anyways? You know what I mean?
So you're seeking rectification because you know that you're too harsh.
Oh,
so
yeah.
One thing that you've said to me before is, like, sometimes you feel like you're too direct. Like, you say, oh, I'm just direct and I'm not empathetic like you, George, or I'm not sympathetic to the cause in between. And I sometimes think about, like, those statements. I used to say that about myself. That used to be something I said. And then what I've understood is that the true power of influence is actually control of oneself. And I know that if I exert control on myself and show a little grace in the moment, what I call grace of the idea, I can have a way bigger impact because I'm trying to figure out what they actually need or what they're trying to convey. You know, so I'm quick solution kind of oriented as well. But I think that that's been tempered because, you know, God blessed me with one of my children's special needs, right? And that teaches you a different heart of temperance and patience. Like you can put me in the craziest scenarios ever, and I'm just like, I'll sit there patiently and kindly and compassionately. Why? Because God, I wasn't always like that, because God gave me a very hard son, an autistic son. And that's what's taught me that, Shane, you know, that empathetic, sweet kind of side. And so, yeah, that's, you know, the difference is the grace and forgiveness are very different. And what you're saying, you're seeking to rectify after righteous anger, but then you realize it wasn't that righteous, because our mission is to help others, right?
Yeah.
The mission is to help others. How do we actually convey the message properly? So it's an interesting topic. We all struggle with this, right? We all struggle. Should I seek forgiveness? I was right. I was right in that circumstance. I don't need to seek forgiveness. And as soon as you say that, there's some form of forgiveness you need to seek. As soon as I'm right, arms crossed, there's something there. And like, I see so many fathers and sons and mothers and daughters who don't talk to each other because they don't know how to speak a heart language, to speak forgiveness, you know? So tell me this, Shane, when was the last time you showed extreme grace to a person? You have to name them, but you can give us like an idea of where you showed extreme grace, where you should have eaten that person alive, but you just went, it's good.
Okay, there's the extreme grace, I can't even name that person. But let's just say that there was many let's just say there was much evidence of many violations, and I could have stayed stewed on the situation. And I'll give you another example, but there were a couple in the last, few years or whatever, where I really did, I could have came down with like proper righteous anger and retribution, and justice. You know what I mean? Where it was like, I had all the information, all of the facts, and I could have been very heavy-handed. But I thought, for this person's wrongdoing, grace, I need grace. We all need grace. And at the end of the day, it started off as a friendship, like, why would I want to, maybe there's always what we don't know, and things happening in their world. And I mean, I decided grace is good. I would rather than looking at like, oh, you are in the wrong, rather than looking at it with that type of perspective, I thought, what would it look like if I just let it all just fly under the bridge and look to a brighter future with them saying, hey, leave the door open for continued growth, progress, and friendship towards prosperity. What would it look like if I left that? But first thing I had to do is I removed myself from any further risk. I mitigated that aspect. In other words, you know what I mean? And you have to cut your losses at certain points. You have to say, okay, well, this cost me X, Y, Z. Am I going to be okay? Right? And my perspective is I'll always be okay.
So let me reiterate what you're talking about right now. Okay, sounds like a little bit of self-forgiveness and self-grace, because you're going through that scenario you just explained is like something you're going through and you're trying to make decisions, and they're hard decisions. And sometimes you have to say, I'm okay with this, even though it's not 100% right, it's not 100% wrong. There's a lot of gray area in life where you have to kind of decide to go left or go right. And, I think you got to give yourself breathing room, because how you talk to yourself is one of the most important things in the world. Right. And I think that's what you're framing up there. And I think that's really, really important. So let's go to that for a second. I'm going to dig into a little bit of a story here. So I got a call a while ago from a friend, and he had been dating a girl for a long time, and they were thinking about marriage. And then all of a sudden, this girl just ghosts him, right? Basically, and won't have a conversation, and they end up just breaking up. Okay. And he calls me and he says, Jordan, I want her to hurt like I'm hurting. Right. I want her to hurt like I hurt right now. And I said to him, dude, How I always feel before I take an action and what's tempered myself and allowed me to succeed later in my life has been one simple thing. And it's one night to reflect on things. So if I want to do something that seems pretty egregious in some way, and I know it is, I just sleep on it for one night, right? For just one night, I temper that. It's like, even in my house now, I have like candy. And I'm like, do I really want that candy? If I wake up in the morning and want that candy, I'll eat that candy, But that's a small piece of it. With all these actions, to really find out if something is right, I always say sleep on the idea, because that's actually giving grace to the person for the time being, and it's allowing you to temper your action to do something correct, I think. So that's one of my ways I've actually practiced this grace and forgiveness to understand my action. That was the advice that I gave them. Because, the things of the heart, when people wrong us and we know they're wrong and they don't act honorably towards us, that breaks people, right? Like that's that portion where you put this person on a pedestal and they're supposed to be special in your life, and they just outwardly just like cast you out because it's easier to not address the problem and be good to you, and then they just leave it there. So that's where those extreme pieces of grace go in. And you're always like, I want to talk to that person. I want to talk to that person. I want answers. People are like, I want answers. I want to have that closer conversation. It's really not that, because what you want is them to ask for forgiveness because they wrong you.
Yeah.
That's what you're looking. And it will never happen. That won't happen. So those closer conversations never happen. Just so anybody, if you're going through a breakup right now, this doesn't happen. Okay. So you might as well just like leave it and move on. The idea is grace is what you have to inherit. And that's why time heals all wounds. I think people tend to build up grace. It's something that builds. And some people have extreme strength where they can just forgive really quickly. Not forgive, but give that huge amount of grace fast. But not all of us, right, Shane? There's some, we just, that one got me. That one got me. That spam email got me. I got
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So
yeah, I mean,
tell me some secrets that you have, Shane. So tell everybody out there a little bit of how-tos about how you temper your emotions.
Well,
because this is a big thing.
Yeah. First, it's not like I haven't I have gone through a lot of adversities. Okay. And comparatively, probably a lot more than most people, because I'm always pushing and going on the edge. Mm-hmm. And so because of that and the very nature of walking on the edge in life and pushing boundaries and exploring and changing circles and changing things that I do, and moving into new realms of existence. Some people go to a job and they work that job, they stay with the same people, the same community for decades. I'm like that for 5-6 months at best. You know what I mean? And so very few people are actually still in my life for a lifetime. You know what I mean? I'm always moving different circles, different areas, trying new things, like exploring new ideas, new ventures. And so there's a lot, I just moved through a lot more people. I have a lot more interactions. And because of that, there's a lot more interactions, there's a lot more relationships. There's a lot more things that can bubble up. You know what I mean? I have a lot of people experience. And so, there's been times that where I've loved people and trusted them and hoped and wanted and believed the best in them, and have not been so well treated or received or respected in kind. And so there's been times where it's been tough, and times where I've been betrayed. There's been times where I've had things stolen from me. There's been times where people have broken trust and acted out of alignment and immoral. And I look at that as those are the great teachers of my life. Those are the great teachers of my life, because they taught me, number one, what I truly value. Because if a relationship is in your life and it causes you pain, if it's causing you disturbance, if it's not done, if it's not done in an intention to grow you, but if it's actually just there to nag and hurt you and pull you back, then you get a very strong contrast in life. And you should be grateful for that, because that person has now taught you more of what you do not want and what you do not align with. And it taught you to understand your values better. The better you understand your values, the easier it is to see your values that you want to see in the people that you allow close to you.
Yeah,
right?
that's a really interesting comment. So I did this value exercise a while ago, and I realized that my highest value is like the thing that charges me up the most. Anyways, the thing that I like to do the most is develop other people. So work in groups of people to succeed together. So I showed that to my wife, and then I started charting out how I act with her. And it was 50% of the time, it was actually against my main value. And so I readjusted how I looked at my relationship with my wife. And since then, it's been like way easier. So I know that sometimes there's points of contention, like we don't get to spend as much time together or something's difficult. But I ask myself, like, what's my main point here? Is it to be heard? Like, I need her to listen to me? Or is it like, hey, I want to help her be the best person she can be? And so I start changing my phrase, like, I ask myself before I answer something, does this meet my values? Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Does that kind of work in there? And if it's not working, I just stop myself and I listen a little bit more. You know what I mean? And it's kind of interesting that you go back to that. We had that conversation before about values and development. I'm just saying, like, if people actually practice this stuff, it's not like this the ethereal, difficult thing to map your values down and be like, this is the things that make me do something. Okay. It's actually a fairly easy exercise, and you go through it and you actually live by it. And you ask yourself a question, man, I'm mad right now. Why am I mad? Because this, does it get me anywhere by acting like this? Does it meet my value chain? And if it doesn't, you just immediately give it grace or let go of it, and then you ask someone a clarifying question. I said, well, I took that like this, and that actually kind of got to me a little bit because of this. Is that what you meant, or did you mean something different? And I've learned to ask that clarifying question, but express it with my emotion so they understand I took it some way. So it's not like you got to figure out what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I want to talk about how this all relates at deeper levels to the results in our life. Like the one of the biggest things that gets in the way of relationships that causes the need for forgiveness or grace is miscommunication, a lack of clarity, and assumptions. Okay, miscommunications, lack of clarity, and assumptions. And they're all very interweaved and tied in, but they're very like just little branches off of the same thing of just not actually listening, or being present, because there's always information that you should be picking up. And if you're discerning and if you're present and aware, then there's always all the information that you need being presented about a person or a relationship. But we tend to be absentee mentally, when we're in relationships, when we're talking with people, when we're building relationships, when we're doing business with people. Like, there's so many things that we're absent to. We should have been paying attention, but we come up with assumptions, misunderstandings, and we lack clarity because we don't get clarifying questions. Now, what that ends up leading to is, let's talk about the damage of unforgiveness.
So right? Shane, can we hold it right there? Because I want to address something that popped in my mind it's been super clear to me lately. There's a lot going on in a human being, but what most people don't realize is most of it's spiritual. On a very high level, it's spiritual. And the reason we're not present is because we've been taken by the world. Something is happening. Something very deep in our souls is happening. Music can take you. Words can take you. Outside influences like addictions in some form. Some people are addicted to their phones, to videos, to knowledge, to work. Wow, a lot of people are addicted to work, right? And they don't want to admit that. Or the gym, or whatever it is. Anything can be an addiction if it's taking away from the goodness in your life and you're doing it as a reaction to a circumstance, and it gives you that dopamine hit. And I think people have to be aware that there's things that are at play in you that can wreck your presence and your ability to bring value and goodness, and actually be able to deal with something really heavy and come out with the right reaction. That unforgiveness, right? So let's talk about dealing with unforgiveness now. But I just wanted people to be aware. We did this whole couple podcasts on spiritual warfare. That's a real thing. Like some of the music nowadays, can change your state. It's like literally someone on a mountain spouting a curse at you.
Yeah.
So just beware that this can put you in a permanent state, not permanent, but semi-permanent state of unforgiveness or anger, just by the things that you listen to.
I can talk about that in just a minute. I saw a really interesting experience on the weekend, but okay, so let's talk about unforgiveness. Now, the world teaches people, man, stay in your lane. Man, that person, screw that person. The world teaches you bitterness, resentfulness, unforgiveness. It teaches you anger. It teaches you hate. It teaches you division. The world teaches you a lot of nasty little things. Okay. God doesn't teach you any of that stuff, but the world will. And the world will teach you that God will teach you nasty things, which is also really messed up. Right. So an unforgiving heart. Let's talk about this. Okay. And I always tell people, if you say you've forgiven someone, but you would never break bread with that person again, even if they asked for forgiveness, for example, then you're not forgiving them. It's just bitterness in disguise, and you're full of crap. You're lying. Okay. Yeah. Forgiveness without a willingness to reconcile the relationship is not forgiveness. That is just bitterness in disguise. People are like, oh, but that person, I can forgive them, but I don't have to have them back in my life. Sure, you don't. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. And if you heard it that way, you weren't listening, right? You wanted to hear what you wanted to hear, because there's maybe someone in your life that you would love to just see burn in hell for all of eternity, right? Because they did something to you. But if they had a realization and they came to you and they said, hey, I'm really sorry, can you please forgive me? Would you forgive and reconcile? Because if they said, forgive me, and you've forgiven them, and you wouldn't, if you were friends before, they did something, and then they said, hey, can you please forgive me? And then you weren't willing to be good friends again, you still have that hardened heart. That is where you've blocked your blessings, because that friendship, they just came to a realization that the value of that friendship was greater than the division or the pain, and that they wanted that back. They asked for forgiveness. That means you should actually work on restoring and reconciling with that relationship. In fact, Jesus said, if your brother sins against you, how many times, someone asked him, if my brother sins against you, how many times should I forgive him? Jesus said, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. You cannot forgive someone that many times if they're not back in your life. If you're like, yeah, I know that you said forgiveness, but if you're still hard-hearted, you're still on your own lane, you're not calling them up, going for coffee again, you're not spending time, you're not doing stuff with that person, because there's still hardness in your heart. Now, I want to talk about how that blocks your blessings. King David in the Bible, okay, his son Absalom, okay, tried taking over the kingdom, and David didn't want to kill his son. It was this crazy thing, and so he basically went and he hid out in the woods with his boys, while his son Absalom was like literally trying to take over the kingdom. And now, before this, there was this King David had a best friend many years before this, named Jonathan. And Jonathan was actually the previous king's son. And David and Jonathan became like best friends. Like they were super tight. You know what I mean? Like they were like bros for freaking life. And Jonathan died in battle or something. I can't remember. He died in battle, right? Yeah. And so David was brokenhearted. And David went and searched the kingdom for Jonathan's any heirs in his family, right? Found this one guy who was in his family. It might have actually been Jonathan's son or something like that, or his grandson or his nephew or something like that. And so this is only one of Jonathan's living relatives. But the guy was I think he was like a paraplegic, right? Like he needed to be carried around, total cripple, right? And so David gave him a whole kingdom. You know what I mean? Gave this guy who was Jonathan's, just in remembrance of Jonathan. Now, David received a lot of blessings. You know what I mean? He was like basically the first real like designated king of the Israelites. You know what I mean? Like it was a big deal. You know what I mean? It was like the one that God said it was the thumbs up, Well, David, when Absalom was taking over David's kingdom, the cripple guy, I can't remember his name now. It was like, and it doesn't matter. It's not really relevant. Here's the point. He had a servant, and the paraplegic guy told his servant, hey, go to King David, because he's stuck in the castle. He can't really go and escape. You know what I mean? He's freaking crippled. So tells his servant, go tell King David I'm with him. The servant goes and tells King David, hey, you know that cripple guy? Yeah. He's totally backstabbed you. He's trying to partner up with Absalom. And David was so shocked and hurt. He was offended. He was like, how dare he? How dare he? What a, like, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, so finally Absalom ends up dying in battle. It's really sad. King David goes back, takes his kingdom over. And then, you know, the paraplegic guy walks into the freaking throne room and was like, King David, thank God you're alive. Oh my gosh. You know, my servant betrayed me. I was always on your side. He lied to me. I was stuck here. I couldn't move. And King David said, oh yeah. All right. Well, you can have half of your kingdom back, because David had given all of the paraplegic guy's kingdom to the servant who lied. You know what I mean? So here's King David over here. Here's this paraplegic guy. And they were good friends. They lived together for years. Absalom goes and takes over. The paraplegic guy's freaking servant goes and lies to King David. This guy gets in trouble. King David gets mad. King David had a hardened heart. He was like, I forgive you. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to forget this. And he stayed bitter and resentful about it. Now, because of that, it actually divided the kingdom. God punished King David because of this hardness of heart and took away his blessings for his family and all of their generations. He had one good son after that, King Solomon, who was the last good king. Okay. And then after that, the kingdom of Israel, it just split and divided, and there was always chaos and turmoil, and there was always division, because it started with the divided heart. Now, everything goes top down. So if you've got bitterness and unforgiveness in you, your kids are going to have bitterness and unforgiveness in them, because you're going to be spitting off evil little narratives to those kids. You will. Don't think you won't. You will. It's going to come out your face, and you're going to do it, and you're going to poison those children's minds with your own bitterness, resentfulness, and unforgiveness, because you have a hardened heart. And so really, at the end of the day, where grace needs to come in is when you look at something truly as, and I think to understand grace means to step into personal responsibility at a high level, and to really look at it like, I created that. Somehow, no, I got myself into, somehow my actions, my words, my life, my deeds got me into that situation. I take responsibility for that. Even though this person has done something, for me to hold on to that is to hold on to nothing more than a stone. And you cannot get blood from this stone. Throw it away and let go, and learn to walk in love and forgiveness. It's not easy, but it gets easy when you do it.
Let's talk about that. There was a famous portion in the Bible, which is probably the most evident story of calling people out on forgiveness and grace, to be specific. There was this adulteress, and she had committed adultery against her husband, and she was brought to the town square, and you know, she was about to be stoned by all the men of the village, right? And they said, Rabbi, she's committed this sin and she's supposed to die for this. And he said, look at the rock. He took it. And he said, well, let thou amongst us without sin cast the first stone, right? Or let thou amongst you, he's saying to everyone, without sin cast the first stone, because Jesus is the only one who could actually cast that, and he wouldn't. And so they all had to drop their rocks and walk away, because when you think about judgment upon another person, think about what you've done, you know, and that's a big thing. It's like, I've done some shitty things in my life. I'm just throwing it out there, right? And I know when I'm with people and I practice this, they go, oh, can you believe that person? And you're like, yeah, sorry to say, I've probably done worse. You laugh and they chuckle and they give you this look like, right? So you're like, maybe we should just like be okay with it, because we've been in that spot too.
Well, yeah, you know, Jordan Peterson says, you know, before you criticize the world, make sure your house is in perfect order.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. It's so easy for us to react in the moment on something and instantly go to forming judgments and narratives and contention and condemnation. Like you're like, when you label someone, you're a crappy person, or you're doing this, or I hate that person because of this, right? Like, then I challenge you to really look at your life. And if I knew, and maybe I do, know every little stinking secret you've got, every little twisted detail of all of your thoughts and every word you've ever said and everything you've ever done wrong. Oh, that one especially. And you, don't even get me started with you, right? And you did what yesterday? Really? And you're judging me today? Holy smokes. Do you have any idea the things that you did last week? Yeah. God has that all on camera. All right. So, all of it. So, like, think about this, right? Like, who are we to judge?
Think about the data storage costs on that, Shane.
Yeah, it's in the cloud.
It's in the cloud.
It's in the cloud.
It's in the black hole somewhere that he's filed.
Yeah. All of the data on humanity since the beginning of time is kept in a couple black holes.
This is why, because Jesus keeps data. That's why I have this shirt, like the Pentium symbol for like Jesus.
Dude, what? I want that shirt.
Is that cool or what? Because he does. He's got cloud storage and he's got a heck of a chip going on, right? Everyone's worried about that. Like, imagine this like all-knowing being watching you all the time. You'd be like, oh, I better pay attention to what I do.
Yeah, so, people are worried about their cameras like capturing all their moments. And I'm like, it should just be a small sign to you.
Yeah.
That if you like in this is one thing, you are always in the view of God. He sees you always, in all your ways, in every way, all the time, right through you. Every thought, every action, every word, every deed, every intention of the heart is always laid out bare in front of God. So, should we judge? Should we be unforgiving? I mean, I think it's a greater call is that, like, we're taught to not forgive. That's a world thing. But I think the greatest thing is like, but, like maybe some people would have an argument that, like, what's a relevant argument around not forgiving?
Well, okay. Well, let's talk about this. A lot of people in the world were taught, I'm better than that person because I've achieved more or done more and things like that. And there is, in every society since the start of time, there's levels of caste. Okay, there's the rich, the semi-rich, the semi-poor, the poor, whatever you want to call them. It doesn't matter. There is forms in the past of slavery and not slaves and kings and queens and serfdom, whatever. That was a form of separating people, okay, based on their abilities at those times, okay. And we have the same thing. And a lot of people live in unforgiveness because they say, I'm of a higher caste. I drive a Lamborghini, right? I have the big house. I don't have to be submitted to the lower class people. Like, how dare they're in my presence? That is a form. So people know that casteism that a lot of people live in. And I'm saying a lot. If you're in this world right now and you don't think that's real, it's real. Every day, watch someone say, oh, you see that homeless person? What a piece of trash. All the time. Okay, it goes off like crazy because you think in your head somehow if your circumstance was the same as theirs, that you would have done better. I'm going to tell you what, you probably wouldn't. You would have probably been the same person that they are. God gave you the blessing of giving you good people. And remember, try to remember that they have a story and it's a lot harder than yours. And that's why they're in that spot. It's not your strength. You're by grace, God's grace. So don't have this big ego like I'm better. That is permanent unforgiveness. You live in an egotistical, what I call BS world, that you think somehow that the grace you've been given and the blessings you've been given have come on your shoulders. And we're taught by these teachers out there like Tony Robbins and these teachers to tell us that, oh, it is us and we can build ourselves and we can manifest. Listen, things are a blessing and we can exude and point back to the creator, or we can say it was all me. But one day that judgment will come upon you. So you have to decide who you want to say did it. And for me, I think God gave me blessing in my life. And I'm very happy to share that with other people. And I want them to do well. And I'm not better than that guy on the street. I just had different circumstances. Right. And so that's what I think that permanent, you ask about what that permanent unforgiveness is. That's saying I'm better than somebody else. That's what that is. And it rides on my heart sometimes too, because I'm always on the success train and building businesses and things like that. And I have good friends like you and like Jared and tons of other people that keep my wife for sure. Definitely my wife keeps my ego in check. It's so funny. You're like, you know what company I built today? And you come home and you're like, shut up, idiot. Here's the broom. Clean up the house. It's those humbling moments that remind us, no, I'm not better. My wife just shoved this in my face. She's like, go to work now, real work. I don't care what you do on the outside. Yeah. It doesn't, you're not a hero in your own home,
Well, so. And the whole thing about success is it's moving into the realm of it's so subjective, right? It is so subjective and it's so conditioned because really, truly, I mean, it's that person who's happiest in the moment that is the most successful. I know a lot of rich people that are right now, like hiding away, living in fear and terror and dread and consumed and paranoid because they've accumulated so much stuff that the idea of death frightens the shit out of them. You know what I mean? I'm super comfortable with death. Like I totally know what's happening, where I'm going. You know what I mean? I'm like, man, it's better than this. Like, I get it. I know exactly what it's like. Like, not exactly, but I know. I have absolute confidence and faith. So for me, it's not a scary thing at all. This is a temporary little thing. And so I sought the accumulation of wealth and riches for a period of time. And then now I'm more like the downsizing thing of life. And like, what would life look like if I gave up all of that and just traveled around and did music and touring around and meet new people and hang out in campfires for the rest of my life, preaching about Jesus and making music? I don't know, like, what's the future like, can create anything. What is riches? What is true gold? What is real 24 karat, value? And I think it's completely subjective. Now, I'm not saying don't seek success and prosperity. Absolutely, you should. It's an inherent nature. We do feel better as if we progress. It's just a fact. If you're not progressing, it tends to make you feel a little bit slumpy. But you could progress in different ways. It doesn't have to be financially. It could be in your relationships. It could be with your health. It could be with your work. It could be just with the way that you do things. It could be with a hobby or something that you're passionate about, or developing somebody else, or giving back in different ways. Whatever progress is mandatory, however, in some form or aspect, in order to fight against the darkness coming in of lack of progress, which diminishes the human soul and light.
So Shane, let's talk about this, because I think that it's an interesting subject about living in grace and living outside of ego, which is what I call it. It's an important thing. And the lesson that I learned most deeply from scripture anyway. So if you guys want to go and read a book, there's something called the Book of Ecclesiastes. I know that's a big name, but Ecclesiastes is in the Old Testament, near the end of it, if you guys want to go look it up. And it's by King Solomon. And King Solomon tells you, like, I've had everything. He's like, I'm the richest man in the world. He's like, I got 700 concubines, 900 wives, like all this stuff. You will never have what I have. And I'm at the top of the mountain. And what you have to realize is everything is vanity. And unless you love God in your heart and put God at the center of your life, you have nothing. Because these riches are so feeble, your cup will feel empty the next day. It's such a beautiful narrative, because I don't care who you are listening to this right now, you will never have more than King Solomon had. You will never be that great. The richest king in all of history, you will never have that. And if he says the top of the mountain is vanity and God is all that's important, go read that book and question your life and question what's important. That was one of the best books I've ever read from a non-Christian or Christian perspective, or religious perspective or non-religious. That was one of the best books I've ever read, because it came from a man who has everything. And that That's that epitome. At the top of the mountain, what's it really like? So let's see how that translates to the real world. Right now, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, they're giving away all their money because they're like, well, this is nonsense. At some point, it's just nonsense. If I have 1 billion, 10 billion, 100 billion, it's nonsense. It doesn't affect my life anymore. So this game of money, why they're giving it all away, because they realized at the top of the mountain, everything is vanity, right? Everything is vanity. Why? They don't need it. They're giving it all away, trying to make the world better in an altruistic sense. Because at the same thing, they came to the same conclusion as Solomon, that the world is about connection. It's about love. It's about the essence of God. Whatever they're calling it, that's what they're feeling, is that connection, essence, development of others, and goodness. And they're trying to give back to it. So it's kind of interesting that even our barons of today are doing the same thing as our barons of yesterday and trying to distribute the wealth to the people and distribute the goodness, because they've been to the top of the mountain and they're like, it's really stupid up here. Like, why am I here? This is nonsense, right? So it's kind of funny. And I think that it's a form of grace. Is like they worked their whole lives and then they're like, okay, I want to bless everybody with this, because they realize that the only gift they have to give is everything that they have. And if they end life with nothing, they're like, hey, it's the same as ending life with something. And it goes back to that story that Jesus told. And this young man said, Master, I want to follow you. He said, Lord, I want to follow you. And he said, and Jesus turned to him, and he was a rich young man. And he said to him, great. He's like, follow me. All you have to do first is give away everything you own. And the kid turned around, walked away, and said, I can't do that. Can't do that. So Shane, you're on mute, by the way.
There you go. Sorry about that. Yeah. So the finish on that was when Jesus said, it's harder for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And the disciples said, well, then how, Lord, can we do this? And he said, well, with God, anything is possible. Let's define that message. So camels can fit through the eye of a needle. What do you mean, Shane? A sewing needle? No. First off, I don't even think they had sewing needles like we would have today 2,000 years ago, guys. Aloha. First, second thing is the eye of a needle was what they would call the turret on a castle. So it was like actually like a big, huge turret where the archers would sit to keep people away, right? And there would be an eye in the turret, and it would be a doorway. It'd be like a little tiny thin doorway. And in order to get the camel through there, you had to duck his head, kind of squat down a little bit. They had to take all the bags off and squish the bastard through the thing. You know what I mean? So it could work. But you have to leave your material belongings behind. And that's why it's so hard. It's that sense of vanity, of I've attained things and wealth, but everything is not yours. You actually don't own anything. You're not like it's dust. This is formed dust. Okay. It's temporary form. It's not, it's really nothing. You know what I mean? It's a microphone right now for sure. But in the spectrum of time, it's just dust. All the stuff you've got is dust. It's just dust. It's just shaped dust. So why get so attached to these things? Why get so attached to the form of identity of feeling of grandeur and I am so magnificent? Really at the end of the day, even that is a form of attachment, the form of attachment to this identity that we place on ourselves. The ego is nothing more than a dust. It's a self-identification mechanism that helps us differentiate things and discern things. However, it can grow out of control, and left unchecked, we lose our humility, and we no longer view ourselves as one being, one family, one body. We look at ourselves as, I did better than that guy. Ha, ha, ha. Too bad for him. I'm in a better place. You know what I mean? But you're not really, because you're still just dust, And so it's this higher level concept of understanding, like of why it is essential that we forgive. It is an essential thing. And I think it's one of the greatest joys
So
in our life that we get blessed to experience.
let's talk about that, Shane. So what I've been taught, there's two famous things that come to mind. The first is I was told that everything you have is borrowed, Jordan. I'm like, so what do you mean? Well, you didn't have it before you got here, and you won't have it after you leave. So you just borrow it for a time being. And I thought, well, that's an interesting concept. And then I was told the story of the Buddhist sand paintings. Have you heard of the Buddhist sand paintings?
No.
It's a very interesting idea. So these Buddhists, they work all year on this mural with hundreds of different colors of sand that are dyed, and they make this beautiful art project, right? This beautiful art project, and then they float it onto the sea or onto the river at the end of a year or in the celebration, and the waves just wash away all the sand. And they're like, why would you destroy such a beautiful mural that like 10 monks just worked on for an entire year and not preserve that? And they're like, because it was the journey of making it and the beauty in the moment that it had that made it important. It's like, oh, okay, that's some deep esoteric stuff that just hit me in the face. But their concept is that, life is fleeting, and that the moments are what are important. It's not the accruement of wealth or reputation or all these things. It's that moment you live in. And so many people have been drawn into this vast expanse of social media where you're watching us now, but they live on it. They breathe on it. They're addicted to it. And they can't stay present with friends and family. They can't pour into one another because they've been disconnected. What you're talking, Shane, they've been disconnected from the matrix, from the, what we live in, this interconnection of matrices together that help one another, feed off one another. And when you live in this technology world and you allow yourself to be disconnected, you risk losing everything, including your eternity. So, guys, question that. Just question, is that important? Is that something that's happening to you? And if not, sometimes you can turn your phone off. It's a real thing. And just go for a hike and connect with a person and talk about life and dreams. And don't be afraid to dream big, right? I was always taught to dream so big that your dreams would make God lean forward in his throne and go, what did he say? Even though I don't know if God has that deep voice, but you know how it is. So the idea tonight, guys, was about grace versus forgiveness. And a lot has to do with how you talk to yourself. Will you give yourself grace? Do you ask you to forgive yourself for the things that you've done? And do you seek rectification with the people around you? So ask yourself, will that build your character? Are you the person you want to be today? Are you present with other people? And will you be someone who speaks life or someone who speaks death? Because there is no in between. You're one or the other. And so I leave that with you tonight on grace and forgiveness. Now, Shane, do you want to close up with anything wonderful?
Yeah, grace is giving someone something good, though they don't deserve it. And I think that we all need grace. And the life and death of Jesus and the resurrection is all about grace. We're all sinners. Jesus died on a cross to give us the grace to be forgiven, even though we don't deserve it, even though we have all committed atrocious crimes in front of a holy, good, righteous, just God. And Jesus paid the price. He paid the price for our sins. He died on a cross. So you put your faith in him. And Jesus was God, you know what I mean? Like the only one who could pay an infinite price for all the infinite sins is an infinite God. But God had to come in the form of a man, you know what I mean, to die on that cross. So that wasn't a man. That wasn't some ascended master. It was God himself came, spoke like no one else ever spoke, did things no one else ever did things no one else could ever do. He healed the sick. He raised the dead. He cured he gave sight to the blind. He repaired the lepers. You know what I mean? He put ears back on people after they were chopped off. It was a pretty amazing thing. And when he said, I am, men and women fell to their knees. And when he died on the cross, the entire earth shook and stones split and broke. And you can have an eternal relationship with a God that loves you that much. And that's grace that we are saved, not through works. And it's just simply done through faith. And so I'll leave you guys with that message. I think this has been a good one, Jordan. I really appreciated this conversation. And yeah, we'll see you guys on next week's episode of the 667 Experience. Have a great night.
Thanks, guys.